Joe, it's a pleasure to have you on board the Transatlantic. I always wanted to meet you. Always. I was always very curious. And I feel like now that we just talk offline a little bit, feel like I met you like in my other life.
Yeah, because I think it's a part of that thing, right, where you have stuff around you.
Yeah.
Like I go like, oh yeah, I know, oh yeah, I get that. And yeah.
That's awesome, man. So great. Look, so I'm going to ask you 7 questions.
Yes.
We call this like the 7 C's interview.
Yeah.
And I'm going to try to capture like a side of you that it's probably less, let's call it like less professional and more personal, because most of these questions are rooted like in poetry, literature, and like life in general, not like necessary advertising. So let's start with the first one, okay? Okay, so Gustav Eriksson of Finland owned the last great fleet of square-rigged ships. And he actually took like a war tour with these ships. Now, if I were to ask you, imagine that you own like the latest fleet of ships, and I were to ask you to go somewhere. 2 questions. Where would you go? And who would you want to come with you?
It's a lovely question.
Thank you.
And I feel like today I'm probably not going to answer any of your questions. but so maybe let me explain and then I'll answer the question.
Right.
So the last, well, I've been doing my job for 20 something years, right? But like the last 10 have been really intense from a time point of view. Stress for sure, all the rest, but like maybe it's like 10, 12 years that I've had an assistant, right? And that assistant helps me organize my day. I can't do it. I have no memory, none at all. So like I don't prepare for anything or pictures. I mean, I do, but it doesn't help.
Right.
And then also I need someone to say, go here, go here, go here.
Right.
My wife, who's outside there as a producer, she's my boss too. She tells me what to do, right? Once I'm somewhere, I'm engaged, I'm 100% on, but I struggle with that. There was this moment 8 years ago, and I remember the exact day, because some friends from the UK had flown over to Portland for a big birthday of mine. And my wife had organized a couple of days off work for me. And I was in my car and I was driving them up to like Mount Hood, to Columbia Gorge. And there'd been storms and the tree was down. There was like literally like with the Pacific Northwest, we've got like a 150-year-old pine tree across the road. And there are guys chainsawing it. And so I stop, you can't drive. So I get out and I go, hey, how are you guys? And they're like, I was like, how long is this going to be? And they're like, nah, maybe an hour, something like that. We should be clear in an hour. And they're like, and I was like, that's okay. And they're like, are you okay? And I said, yeah, we're just going to go into town and get a hot chocolate, a cup of coffee. And as I turned the car around, I almost cried, because what I was going to do for the next hour was actively do nothing. I was just going to sit around. And it was just it's a horrible admission, but that was a profound moment.
It's a profound moment. It is.
It's profound, yeah. Because I was running an agency. I was a husband. I was a father. And so every minute was taken. And I just had this minute where we literally just sat and had coffee and like watched people walk past.
So you will keep your fleet at the
Here's what I would do. I would fill it with supplies and I'd just head off.
That's awesome. I love it, man. You know, actually, doing nothing, we are not so used anymore, right? At least like, you know, maybe a few years back, a few decades back, we were a little bit more used to do nothing.
Yes.
Into the elevator, phone didn't exist. You spend like, you know, what, a minute doing nothing, staring at the wall. Waiting in the car for someone to come, you were like, you know, staring like in the emptiness. Yeah. Right now, like because of the phone, we are not used to that anymore. So I think it was a comedian I heard talking about like how terrifying is truly like to just do nothing for like an extended period of time and really put things in perspective. Like, you know, if you, because it's almost like life stops.
Yeah.
And you're on this rat race, but life stops, truly stops, pause. And it's scary. It's really scary, but it's beautiful. It's profound, as you say.
Yeah. So it's either the act of actively doing nothing, or of doing something with actively no outcome. So I'm not heading to Morocco. I am not sailing to, I am just moving on the water.
I love it, man. Second question. Okay, so visualizing known narrative and reworking them into our own ideas, and most of the time becomes like, you know, 60-second films, is very familiar. It's very like, you know, common in the industry. Now think of the 2019 movie, for instance, Lighthouse. I'm in love with the movie with William Dafoe. The movie was born because the brother of the director, Max Riegers, wanted to transport the story, the unfinished story of Edgar Allan Poe, The Lighthouse, in a movie. Now, if I were to give you a pen and a paper and ask you like, hey, you can bring into 60-second commercial any story you want that you have read or you were told or you bump into it, what would that story be? I have one, but already it's been done, unfortunately.
No, what is it?
There was a story I read a long time ago. It was from John Cheever. It's called The Swimmer.
Oh, yes.
And I found this story like extremely creative. It was like this guy that is in a swimming pool on one day, and to come home, instead of like walking back home, he jumped from a swimming pool to a swimming pool to a swimming pool. And it became actually a Levi's, very famous old Levi's commercial, I think from BBH, I believe. And it was a John Cheever. It's a John Cheever story, which is beautiful to me. So what would that story be for you?
I'm going to not answer the question again. because here's the thing is that I love your answer. I love your answer, right? And I was a teenager in London when that came out.
Right.
And for me, the only real use of that is if that seeing the movie inspires somebody to find the book.
Right.
Because I think some things just don't fuck with the format. It gets to the point where I'm not as interested. Like, I read a book and someone says, what's it about?
Right.
And I have like 30 seconds to tell you what it's about, but that's not what the book was about. So I do feel like sometimes our job is to be reductive in places it shouldn't be reductive, arguably, right? So I have an answer to your question, and then I have two actual answers to your question.
Right.
There is an Elmore Leonard book called Ombre. Now, I
read the book. Right. I read a book. Exactly.
Now, there's a movie to that book. Now, the movie isn't exactly the book, but it is I mean, I don't think anyone needs to have a best film, but I certainly have watched it a bunch of times and I really appreciate it. And it's a movie about identity, and it is wonderful, wonderful. Now, to do that in 60 seconds, it may be beautiful, and it may do a disservice to both Paul Newman and Elmore Leonard, right? So actually the things that I love as a writer are things that are structurally interesting, that I don't know how to format. So
very interesting that you mentioned that author, because I actually read, how do you pronounce it? Because like my pronunciation is gonna like ruin his name. Elmore
Leonard.
Yeah, Elmore Leonard. But is one of the favorite author of Quentin Tarantino. In fact, Quentin Tarantino, during an interview, confessed that he started writing dialogue being inspired heavily by him. Jackie Brown, Pulp Fiction, most of this dialogue, they come from like, Edmund Rand, and like, and what was the other book that you wrote? Punch Drunk Love, I think. Rum Punch Love, something like
Elmore Leonard has half of westerns, and then also non-westerns, because he's not always writing in a western context, but they're adapted to that. I will tell you, this is my wife, who is in the other room there and is probably going to walk in when she sees, she was working with a director in London years ago who had made enough money through advertising that he wanted to make a film, self-funded. Okay. And he had an Elmore Leonard book called The Tonto Woman. Okay. And he asked Elmore Leonard's people, can I make this into a movie? And they said no. And he fucking did it anyway. And so it's a tiny crew. They go to Spain for 8 days or however long it was. My wife was in one of the early cuts. It was such a small group of people. She was the production manager who ended up being in one of the scenes. And they didn't tell Elmore Leonard. And then it got nominated for an Oscar for short film. And that's when the Elmore Leonard's people embraced it, accepted it, came to the Oscars. But like but that's not my answer, right? That book and that movie is not my answer. My answer are, there's a book called 253. I think it's by Jeff Ryan, and it's about, there's 253 seats on a tube train. There's 253 pages. On each page, there's 253 words. And each page is the description of someone sitting in the seat. But if you read it from the beginning, there's a story in it. So for me, I think that's amazing. The other book that I reference all the time that I've got somewhere around me is called How Things Don't Work. And it's basically a critical look at how everything around us is shit and really badly designed, but in a wildly optimistic way. So for me, to try and condense down the themes that I'm looking for are also ones from interesting structures. So either how can you tell the story of individuality and how we're all linked? Absolutely. From a book that doesn't do that, you have to do the linking. It's interesting you talk about structure, because I think like one of the hardest things to do, probably if I were to like ask this question, is how do you transport like Debbie Foster Wallace footnotes? Yes. Like, into like a 60-second like film, I mean, you take like Infinite Jest, like, has pages of footnotes. So look what I have next to me. I have this next to me right now, right? I did read like that too. Yeah, we probably read the same books, man. Like right now I'm reading actually Chasing the Light from Oliver Stone. Okay, which is really, it just came out, really beautiful. Have you read The Mezzanine? Have you read the Nicholson Baker book, The Mezzanine? No, I did not. Because that's interesting too, because like maybe a third of the book is footnotes. And I do feel like one of the things that, so the format is interesting, because it's like, I have ADHD, and it's like reading a book of somebody who's wildly interested and has ADHD. So I would imagine if I was going to make that into something, it would be a 2 or 3 screen experience. So you could watch a movie while getting cinematic footnotes on the side. I love the idea about being distracted. I love the idea about multiple screens. I love messing with the format of viewing. I think, again, we'll get distracted, but like one of the reasons podcasts are so interesting, this is weird to say on a fucking podcast, isn't it? But one of the reasons is that as a listener, if someone's listening to this, they're the third person. There's me and you and them. Right. And one of the reasons you listen so closely is they're assuming that you or me are going to go, what do you think? Yeah. Breaking like, the fourth wall in podcast. Yeah, because listening to a podcast is so intimate, you feel like you're part of it. So for me, I really do like, I don't want to take films and make them into ads, but I do want to mess with the structure and understanding. Yeah, that's good. That's good, man. Third question. Look, there is a striking fact that shows you that the universe is very much in balance. Now, the melting ice from the glaciers cause fresh water to be added to the seawater, but you know that when the fresh water from the ice melting doesn't have sea.
So it's pretty much, it's gonna, like, you know, has a different weight compared to the seawater. That means that the pressure and the currents are gonna go off balance completely. So the more the ice is melting into the ocean, the more fresh water fighting against seawater, the currents and the ecosystem on the surface is going to be belly up. Now, bringing this into the advertising business, I would like to ask you a question. Considering like an agency, an ecosystem, you, like, you know, of course you run Matter in LA. What would be the single, what would
in
be
the US? Yeah, no, I'll tell you.
yeah. What would be the single elements that can screw an entire credit department?
I've got more than one answer. Is that okay?
Yeah, it's always okay. You can do whatever you want. Sorry, I made a mistake. Is you run in US?
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry,
Now,
and
I should add also, because if anyone's listening, we're hiring. There you go. The other bit is that we've kind of built a bit of an ecosystem of creative companies. So there's LA and New York agencies. There's LA and New York design companies. We have Media by Mother. We work with Super Bloom, a modern production company. Right. We have a ventures portfolio, so we have our own brands too. So there's a bunch of stuff all together, and my privilege is to chat to the whole gang. Okay, so let me answer that. The question is, what fucks up creative cultures?
A credit department, not credit culture. Like if you were, like, imagine credit department be an ecosystem. Yeah. Like, very fragile as every ecosystem is. What would be the single element that you can literally like screw everything up?
I'm going to give you 3 different answers. You can pick whichever one you want.
Right.
The first one is inorganic growth.
Okay.
If you are, depending on the size of the creative department, you can only add a certain amount of culture to it at any point, and that culture being more people. Mm-hmm. If you're a 50-person creative group and you need to add 30 people in 2 months, you are dead. The end. Then I thought about complacency. That's a fuck up. But I've seen people be complacent, and then the kind of ecosystem just pushes them out of it. Right. And I've seen people be arrogant, and sometimes personal arrogance. I do not want to be that person, but sometimes personal arrogance serves the whole. For me, the tough bit is working in an organization that's not incentivized in the same way the creative department is. Mm-hmm. So for me, if you read any of the Freakonomics books, it's basically about incentivization. So if the creative department is the only department incentivized for creativity, it's an island. So I don't know if that's one thing, but it is incentivization for creativity. In my mind, the creative department, the strategy department, the mothering or account service, the producers, they're serving one goal, which is creativity. So for me, I don't know what the single word is. The single word is,
I think I mean, I love your answer, but I think like growth, it's really something that's fascinating, because you always imagine growth being a positive thing, but you eloquently say to me, look, like you got 50 people and you had to add as many people, you fucked. It's true. I mean, there is the sentence like in advertising business that we all hear, right? How big can you be before you get bad, right? Yeah. We all hear about that, but it's true, because I think what attracts me about the word growth is always using a positive meaning, but he has a dark side. You grow too fast, you fuck everything up, and not just in advertising, but look, you just observe like everything in life, like like go to the gym and look at those people that grow too fast. They probably like screw up everything in their body, break their joint, because the body can't sustain like that kind of weights. I'm talking about bodybuilders. Even if something like in nature grew up too fast, is gonna screw up, like, you know, the old balance. So I think like the word growth has a very dark side that is never explored. So that, I think it was a great answer, actually.
Dan Wyden used to say, and the weird thing about this was literally we talked about this sentence in my last call. I was speaking to somebody I worked with years ago, and Dan used to say, how big can we get before we get good?
Then, yeah.
And so Dan's thing is that when I was overseeing Wyden in Portland, we got up to 650 people, but because of the design of the building, because of the leadership of each account, because of the structure,
right,
it could handle it. So we were 11 agencies in one agency. When it messes up so we could pitch any client that would be worth X amount because of the size of it.
Right.
If it was twice that big, we would have said probably not for us. We can't take that size because you have to hire people at a speed that is inorganic. And if you read like Let My People Go Surfing, the Yvon Chouinard book, that's pretty much a manifesto against inorganic growth. Right? It just says do things at the speed you can actually do them.
Yeah, speed is very, very important. Awesome, man. 4th question. The sea has many voices, and is actually a sentence like taken from one of my favorite like poets, T.C. Eliot. The poem was written in 1941, and it continues like the river is within us, the sea is all about us. When I think of voices, I think of writing. I'm a writer by trade. I've been working as a copywriter since I got into this business. I actually work like in many different countries, many different languages, because like, you know, my native language is Italian, but my first language has become like English now. So I always ask myself, how many voices does a copywriter needs to have? Do you think that we can effectively have infinite voices? Or do you think that we only have a few voices that we need to master? Or 3rd option, do you think that we need to have our own voice, develop our own voice, and then apply to different clients, but try to master our own voice?
Is there a 3B? Can I fill in what the 3B one
is?
Well,
yeah. You can give me the 3B. You can give me the 3B
because I agree with 3. I agree with 3, right? Which is you can't fake it, I don't think. So you have to believe the thing you're saying, and it has to come from a place of authenticity and all of the things that you would get taught in any writing school ever. But I think the interesting thing here is that sometimes people are too limiting with what they believe their voice is. And too young a person, their evolution as a person stops. And they go, this is who I am. And it's bullshit. So you can go and learn some pottery today and then start to feel the culture and the love of the activity. I do jiu-jitsu, I ride bikes, I skateboard, I'm a father.
What about the voices? So you're a writer.
Yeah.
Okay. Would you say that your comedy voice is as strong as your emotional voice, or there is more, your emotion, you're more prone to create, like, you know what I'm trying to say? I think like in even in the movie industry, there are directors that they master the comedy. They are directors that master the drama.
Yes, but no, also. So David Gordon Green, he does an art film called George Washington. It's one of the most beautiful pieces of cinema you'll ever see. And then he does Pineapple Express. Which so yes, yeah. So yeah,
there is Martin Scorsese has been doing the same film.
He's been doing the same film with the same fucking people. Now, he's very fucking good at it. That is true. But I don't think that we're not doing the same thing. And B, I'm not interested in making the same thing 30 times. I like jokes. I study stand-up comedy. I study kids' books. I study poetry. I'm into it. I'm genuinely into it. Now, my expertise, I think, is in problem solving. I don't think I'm good at any of the writing. I happen to be a writer because I can explain things in words easier and better. I studied design and I'm garbage at it. But when I've worked on things that have needed a poetic tone,
then you go to the poetic copywriter.
No, I don't. I go to a poet.
It's so interesting because, you know, it's funny. I don't remember if I asked this question to Mark Fitzgerald, which is your friend, right? You both, you guys both were running, like, you know, I don't know, remember if you guys running at the same time.
We were partners, yeah.
Right, you were partners. And he was telling me, like, you know, Simone, one of the things that's we used to do at White & Kennedy was like we leveled it, we typecast the shit out of every writer. Like, you know, if we needed like a, like, you know, emotional manifesto, yeah, go to the writer that's like, you know, it's poetic. If you need like comedy, okay, yeah, I'm gonna tap into that writer. That's what I meant. Like, you know, it's like actors. I think Marlon Brando used to say, you only have so many voices and you only have so many faces in your pockets. You can't do everything, right? And I say with myself, for instance, like, you know, if someone were to ask me, this is a very complicated like matter and so fascinating to me. That's why, like, if someone were to ask me, what do you find more your chords? Like, my chord is to write emotional, and in the emotional thing, I don't think my chord is like the funny thing, the comedy thing. Do I like comedy? Do I understand comedy? Can I write comedy? Yes, but it would never run into my blood as emotional does, as poetry does, because it's physiological. It's physiological to me. It's like, you know what I mean?
Okay, yeah, I do. And you may be world-class at that. And I don't think I'm world-class at any of it. I'm just pretty good in an advertising context, right? Like, with the people I work with, yeah, I'm all right. I can do that. I can write a comedy script. I can write a manifesto. I can write something heartfelt that will make people cry. But there are people who are better at each of them than me. Now, it's weird in advertising that we accept that there are people who are better at us than at directing. People are better at us than voiceovers. People are better at us, all these other things. So when it comes to writing stuff, sometimes it's like you think, like, I had a conversation with my wife one time. She was producing a job I'd written, and she said, what do you want it to look like? And I said, like, I want someone to do something like Michael Mann would do. And she said, what about Michael Mann? And I'm like, no, wait, no, I don't think he does that. She goes, well, I'll call him up. Now, we're allowed that audacity when it comes to directors. But when you say, like what would Amanda Gorman do now? What would this person do now? Like, call them up. Like, we had a few writers that would come in that had never worked on advertising. And then my job was to translate an idea into someone's mind and then let them go free with it. So maybe what I'm saying actually is don't have any of them. Well, I mean, this is for me. I don't think I'm good enough at any of them, but I'm good enough at the first bit, at coming up with ideas and collaborating.
That's awesome, man. That's just such an interesting, like, you know, topic. We could like literally open this up, like, and conversate like for forever. But yeah, it's a very interesting topic. Always really fascinated me because I found so many parallels, even with the journal. I graduated in journalism. So I studied journalism for many years, and like, you know, when you start in journalism, they tell you right away, like, you know, be objective, don't put yourself into it, right? You know, but then, like, you know, of course, like, you know, obsessed and in love with like Hunter Thompson, and the gonzo journalism does exactly the opposite. Like, you put like first person perspective in it, like, you know. Anyway, I'm like digressing, but yeah. Fifth question. The waves put you in a middle states and help you narrow your focus. To stand in front of the ocean might help you find your true calling. Everybody has a calling. I'll tell you a story. One Jeff Beck, unfortunately passed away very recently, was asked if he regretted to have not joined the Rolling Stones. And he said, well, you know what, the money, yeah, I regret the money. could have made a lot of money, but at the end of the day, it wasn't my calling. Do you think that we have that level of integrity in advertising? What I mean by that is this. Let's say an agency call you up. You don't like the place. You don't really like, you know, feel transported into this like, you know, company, but they offer a shit ton of money, and you do it. I mean, we see it like every day. You see it with Ronaldo right now. He go like contract like in Saudi Arabia. He probably hates it, but it's like you can't tell no to that price tag, right? Do you think that we have the Jeff Beck level of integrity in advertising, or do you think that we just like, you know, we chase the money?
It depends if you're asking me of me
yeah,
or me of other people.
No, I'm asking you. My conversation.
I have no problem. There's this. I know I'm talking about books a lot. It sounds like I read a lot. I read so slowly. I'm dyslexic. I read at like a third of the pace of a normal person. So I just happen to be talking about books now. And this book sounds really quite wanky, but it's not wanky at all. It's like it's like a kid's book on philosophy, but it's called The Consolation of Philosophies. And it's Alain de Botton taking classic philosophical thought and applying it to modern day worries, right? And he has this graph, and it's the graph which is the relationship between money and happiness,
right?
And I'm gonna show you it with my finger, and then I'll explain it. And it just goes like this, right? So it goes sharply up, because if you have no money at all, it's really fucking hard. If you don't have a house and you don't have food and you don't have like, if you don't have the basic stuff, life is objectively very fucking hard. But there becomes a point, and for every person it's probably a different amount, where more money does not equal more happiness. As Biggie told us, you get to a point where more money is more problems. And I remember that time, and I remember the dollar figure, right? I was living with my wife in Australia near the beach, and I got paid 50,000 Australian dollars, which it's clearly less now, but at the time it was not a lot of money. I could afford a house, food, and we really wanted to go out and get pancakes once a week. And I was racing bikes and I wanted to get a massage. At $50,000 was where I could pay rent, eat food, get a massage, and have pancakes once a week out. And I remember just being like, oh, it doesn't get better than this. And it doesn't get better than that. I'm not complaining about going to nice hotels and going on shoots and having a wonderful house and driving a car. I'm not complaining about any of that. But life didn't get better. So I've never had to make decisions about money, because it was clear almost 20 years ago that that was the peak. Now I have a child and I have other stuff, but still, like, and again, I talk about Wyden and Mother, right? Is no one gets rich at these agencies. I had to negotiate, like my life depended on it, to not take a pay cut to go to Wyden and Kennedy. So a weird thing happens when you get there, is you realize that everybody else had to negotiate too. Most people took pay cuts. And I'll say Mother's not the place people go to get rich. So what happens is you get there and you realize everyone here could go to insert tech giant here, or massive agency to make a bunch more money. So you look around and you know that the people here, we don't have these conversations openly, but you kind of know these people have chosen
money,
independence and creativity. And
right.
Because of that, I'm not going to question anything else they say. Like, they bought into this. And if you do good work, everyone gets offered more money on a weekly basis. It's not my job to stop them getting offered more money. It's my job to help make a culture they'll want to stay in.
Right. No, that's a good answer. I've been obsessing about integrity, maybe because, like, you know, as you grow older into this industry, you see less integrity. And integrity is a big word, like, you know, and I think like integrity is like, you know, is integrity as a word is like imagine if I were to visualize integrity, it's probably like drive down this freeway where like there is a lot of compromises. Like, you know, at one point you're gonna bump into one of them. But yeah, I do believe that I had the same feeling at one point in life. I thought, and I was making much less money. I thought, why it doesn't get better than this? My problem with is more existentialist problem where like I can't really live in the moments as much as I try to, as much as like try to inspire myself by like, you know, inking my every inch on my skin and remind me like that we live in the now. I can't fucking grasp it. So when I'm there,
Why do you think that is?
oh, I think that I was raised in a very off way. My mom was a little bit off as a person. I was a literature teacher, so she fed me a lot of like, you know, dark literature when I was very young. You know, like read me Proust at 7 when I was 7 years old was like not really a good thing. Of course, it developed like, you know, a very like, you know, refined taste in literature for myself, and of course, it's part of me. But probably other thing. I don't know. Like I'm very like, you know, I was born in Europe where we different. We don't have that kind of pioneer spirit. We have like nostos, the coming home, like, you know, we what the Greek call like, you know, in fact Mediterraneans, like it's like, you know, mar nostos. Anyway, yeah.
No, but can I it is an interesting thing where you get when you the same writer wrote that book called Status Anxiety. And you only have status anxiety in societies where economic movement seems possible.
Yeah, that's interesting.
It's interesting, right? Then you go back to England and I'm going to say Italy, but you go back to European countries where where their foundation was feudal, right? You and me are not going to become kings and queens, right? No. So you're aware at a young age that this is pretty much the lot in life. I might make a bit more money, but this is where I'm going to be. That's actually vastly less stressful. When you come to America, the stress is, why are you not the next president? Right. Elon Musk's a billionaire. Why are you not a billionaire? Like, then you go, fuck. Now you have an added thing. I'll add one thing to this, which is, I'm going to sell you Mother for a second. And that is, from the beginning of Mother, they used, if it had an end line, it didn't have an end line, but it was make your mother proud. And then about 2 or 3 years ago, there was a conversation where Robert had this kind of epiphany, which was, my mum's proud of everything I fucking do. That's a pretty low bar. And in that one conversation, the flip was, make your children proud. For me, that's a profound way to turn up at work. It is really interesting to think about that through. I have an 11-year-old son. Like, if I came home and said, dude, I got a massive pay rise, he don't fucking care. Like, he truly, like, he doesn't care.
Yeah.
But he does care about other things. So this thing, and we do actually talk about this every day, about making our children proud, how we work together, how we have conversations with each other, what we do with our money, who we hire, who we partner with. And sometimes taking all of that stress and condensing it into, are you willing to go home and tell your kid about this? And what would your kid say? Is really, really profound.
I take a lot of perspective. I use my kids. I have 2 little girls, 7 and 11, and I use their lens to look at life. I even write with their lens. Sometimes I just completed a book in 2022. It's called like The Savage Kid, which is written like narrative poetry, but it's written like the same way. It's written with it actually, I took conversation between me and my younger one, sport them into narrative poetry. So they are like 100 pieces, and they are like literally written from the point of view of a 6 years old. So I use that a lot. So I think, I like the flip of like mother, like proud, and like kids. That's very interesting flip. Okay, 5th question. 831 feet, we reached the deepest free dive in human history. This record was set in 2007 by Albert Nietzsche, but he sustained brain injury on the way up. He went so deep that coming up, it damaged his brain. So he touched the limits. He truly, like, went there and made the limit tangible.
Mm-hmm.
We work in a business where every day, there is no day that goes by that there is a manifesto to remind you that, like, you're limitless, infinite potential. I mean, you hear this bad word, but I do believe that everybody has his own limit. And I do believe that the limit is there, might be far away from you, but it's there. Do you know your own limits? Or do you watch your own limit from afar, or you are not aware of your own limit? When we, just to complete the question and give you a little bit of my answer, to not live in the present for me is a real limit. And I know, and I'm fully aware of these limits. And it's something that I struggle on a daily basis, to the point that, like, I had to go to therapy for many years for this. So it's a limit that is there, and it's very transparent. There's no fog around. I don't know if that happened to other people, but I know that's one of the limits that I have.
Yes. So I've got some limits.
Right.
I'll talk about them, and then I'll talk about why it's not worth talking about them afterwards. Years ago, actually back in Australia, I was racing bikes, and I was up at 5:15 to be at training at 5:45, and I'd train 2.5-3 hours before work physically, and then I'd put my feet up,
right,
and I'd drink water and healthy food and do a really stressful job, and then after work I'd train again.
Okay.
And in my mind, what I was doing was stressing my body, stressing my mind, stressing my body. And after a while, my body just shut down, just turned off.
Wow.
Couldn't walk upstairs for 1.5 years properly. It was like it was like chronic fatigue. And it took me 1.5 years to realize it was because I had separated stressors, and that your body does not separate stress. So you can only put your body, absolutely, yeah, it doesn't separate. Stress is stress. And even now, like I bought these machines, and I have wearables that so you have heart rate, and you have heart rate variability. And heart rate variability tests stress, and it doesn't know if the stress is coming from emotional things or physical things. In the end, it's just stress. So my body shut down. So I am now aware that stress is a limiting factor. I love going on 3-hour trail runs. I do jiu-jitsu every moment. I ride bikes. That's stress. And then work is objectively pretty stressful. So what I have to balance out is stressors. So that's my personal one. But let me say this, but I don't think most people get anywhere near, like not 50% near their limit.
Wow.
So the act of being, I was broken. I mean, I broke myself, but I was broken. Sounds like you were broken. It's a wonderful, yeah, it's a humbling thing, right? Like,
it's a humbling thing, and it's also like a very scary thing. I don't know. It's like to meet your limits, not just to say, because like it's easy to say, yeah, like I have limits, but to meet your limit and to touch your limit is scary. Like another limit that I have, I tell you what, it's like I ride motorcycles. Like, I've been riding motorcycles since I was a kid and have many motorcycles. But one of my limits is I do not have the talent of fixing me my motorcycle. If you can spend hours and sit me down. I had friends doing that. My brain bounced back information, I can literally feel how stupid I am, and it's scary. I can really feel, okay, I am dumb on this matter. I'm very dumb. Like my brain doesn't have the intelligence to understand and grasp basic information in that kind of, as opposite, like, you know, when it comes to writing, is the opposite, of course. But I think it's scary to meet your own limit. That's what I experience. When it becomes
normally though, because I was undiagnosed as dyslexic until I was like 22 or something, right? So there were things that I was objectively failing at, but there is a light side to that shadow. So there's a wonderful book called The Gift of Dyslexia that talks about, I have these limits and they show themselves every fucking day, but I have another thing where in my world, everybody else feels uncomfortable.
Right.
And this is the gift of dyslexia. So all I'm going to say is that I'm sure that you feel wildly out of your depth at that moment. But the thing that makes that hard is usually the thing that makes something else wildly easy. So just don't die doing this while being fantastic at the other.
Last question. Okay, so if you were, like, you know, if there was a wind that blew your sail, and if you were to come up with a name of the wind, what would the name be?
I thought about other questions. I didn't think about this one at all, so I'm going to make it up. I learned this word only a few years ago. I have far too much energy. I only know how annoying I am to be around when I had a child who is like me. Right. And I'm like, fucking hell, this dude's a lot. And then I'm like, Jesus, this must be what it's like to hang out with
Hyperactive, hyperactive, what's the word?
Completely hyperactive, seemingly caffeinated all the time, and essentially an extrovert that's impossible to get tired, right? So the word that I really love is, I mean, I like complaining. I like looking around and thinking everything's shit and badly done. But ebullience was this word that was basically ebullience. Yeah, it was this word that was kind of like gifted to me with the chief strategy of the head of strategy at Mother in the US. Is called Charlie McKittrick, and he's a wonderful human. All the people I get to spend my days with, it's a genuine pleasure. And Charlie, sometimes these words come out, and I was like, what the fuck? What was that? And he's like, ebullience. And he kind of described it as, maybe I misremembered, but like optimistic energy.
Sorry, can you spell it for me?
So the energy of optimism.
Ebullient.
Ebullient. I will write it and I will show you it on the screen. And again, being dyslexic, I will write it. It will get spell checked, and then I will show you it. EBULLIENT.
Ebullient. Okay.
Yeah. So I would like to be pushed forwards with an ebullient wind, which is optimism and warmth. There you go.
Okay. Hey Joe, this was a great conversation. I could have like talked to you forever because we very much like the same, and we love books and writing. So thank you so much for letting me.
Hey, I appreciate your time. I appreciate the time you spent on this stuff. It was really, really, really beautiful questions.
Thank you, brother.